In seconds, the sky turned black. Glowing rocks rained from above, volcanic ash swallowed the sun, and thousands of people ran with nowhere to escape. A city that only hours earlier had been filled with laughter, trade, and life was now turned into a living hell. But the most terrifying part of this tragedy was not the eruption itself. It was the fact that just 48 hours earlier, no one believed disaster was about to strike. So let's turn back time to 2 days before Mount Vesuvius erased Pompeii from the map. Right now, beneath your feet, if you were standing here, the ground would feel warm. Not hot, just faintly warm. The way a stone feels after a long summer afternoon. Nobody in the city would think twice about it. In 48 hours, 20,000 people will be living, arguing, falling in love, cheating at dice, praying to gods who will not save them. In 48 hours, none of that will matter. A mountain they have known their entire lives, a mountain they have planted vineyards on, buried their dead beneath, told their children was simply part of the landscape, is about to remind the world that it was never sleeping. It was waiting. This is the story of the last 2 days of Pompeii. Not the eruption itself that is only the final hour. This is the story of everything that came before it. The ordinary Tuesday that became the last Tuesday. The dinners that were never finished. The dogs left chained in courtyards. The bread still sitting in the oven, forgotten for nearly 2,000 years. By the end of this, you will never look at a quiet mountain the same way again. The date, as far as we can reconstruct it, is the 23rd of August in the year 79. The place is a prosperous, sun-bleached city on the Bay of Naples, in the shadow of a green, gently sloping mountain the locals call Vesuvius. It is not considered dangerous. It has never erupted in living memory or in the memory of anyone's grandparents. Its slopes are covered in vineyards that produce some of the finest wine in the Roman world. Its lower flanks are dotted with farms, its base ringed with wealthy seaside towns, Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, Oplontis, where senators and merchants alike come to escape the heat and politics of Rome. Pompeii itself is not the grandest city in the empire, but it is a full and living one. Roughly 11,000 people call it home on an ordinary day, though on this particular week, the number is higher, swollen by visitors drawn to a religious festival just days away, honoring Vulcan, the god of fire. There is a cruelty in that detail that no screenwriter would dare invent. The city is about to be consumed by fire from the earth itself, and its people have just finished preparing offerings to the god they believed controlled it. Walk with me through these last 2 days, not as a historian reciting facts, but as a witness standing in the crowd, in the bathhouses, in the bedrooms, in the streets paved with volcanic stone from an eruption so ancient nobody remembered it had ever happened at all. Because that is the last lesson Pompeii has to teach us. The ground always remembers, even when the people standing on it have forgotten. The sun rises over the Bay of Naples the way it has 10,000 times before, catching first on the sails of fishing boats already out on the water, then sliding gold and orange across red-tiled rooftops packed tightly along narrow streets. Pompeii wakes early. It has to. The Roman day begins at dawn, and by the time the first full light hits the Forum's white marble columns, the city is already loud. Bakers have been awake for hours. Their ovens, built of brick and shaped like beehives, have been glowing since well before sunrise, and the smell of baking bread drifts down side streets and mixes with wood smoke, with the sharp tang of fish sauce fermenting in ceramic jars, with the ever-present scent of animals, mules hauling carts, chickens in courtyards, dogs weaving between market stalls looking for scraps. The streets themselves are a marvel of quiet Roman engineering that nobody walking them bothers to notice, the way we don't notice traffic lights. Raised stepping stones cross the roads at intervals, allowing people to cross without stepping into gutters that run with waste and rainwater, while cartwheels, worn smooth by years of use, roll neatly through the gaps left between the stones. The wheel ruts cut into the volcanic paving stones are already inches deep. Some of those grooves, cut by wagon wheels over decades of ordinary Tuesdays exactly like this one, will still be visible in the stone 19 centuries from now, long after every hand that carved a stone in this city has turned to dust. In the Forum, the true heart of the city, the day's business is already underway. Vendors set up stalls beneath the shadow of the Temple of Jupiter, its columns freshly repaired after an earthquake 17 years earlier had cracked half the city's buildings, a detail worth remembering, because the people of Pompeii already know their mountain can shake the ground. They simply do not know it can do far worse. Merchants call out prices for olive oil, for wine, for fine Egyptian linen brought in through the harbor. A crowd gathers near a political notice painted in red on a whitewashed wall, one of hundreds scattered across the city, urging citizens to vote for a local candidate for public office. Graffiti covers nearly every surface at eye level: insults, love confessions, a gladiator's boasted victories, a child's crude drawing. Pompeii, more than almost any city that has come down to us from antiquity, was loud with the voices of ordinary people, scrawled in plaster for anyone to read. Nobody in this crowd knows they are living inside the last surviving snapshot of a Roman city, frozen exactly as it was lived in. To them, it is simply Tuesday. To understand what will be lost in less than 2 days, you have to understand what Pompeii actually was: not a museum of ruins, but a living hierarchy of wildly different lives packed into less than half a square mile. At the top of that hierarchy live families like the owners of the House of the Faun, one of the largest private residences ever excavated from the ancient world, nearly the size of a city block. Built around 2 colonnaded courtyards and decorated with a mosaic floor depicting Alexander the Great in battle, a floor made from more than 1 million individually placed tiles. The wealthy of Pompeii do not merely live comfortably, they live inside walking advertisements of their own success, their walls painted with mythological scenes in vivid red and gold, their gardens fed by lead pipes running fresh water from the city's aqueduct into private fountains that hiss and splash day and night, a luxury most of the ancient world could not imagine. A few streets away, in the same city, under the same indifferent mountain, families of freed slaves and small tradesmen live crowded into single rooms above the shops where they work, sharing a single water fountain at the corner with a dozen other households, cooking over small charcoal braziers because they have no private kitchen at all. And beneath even them, at the very bottom, are the enslaved, perhaps a third of the city's entire population, cooking the food, weaving the cloth, hauling the water, raising the children of families that will never record their names anywhere. We know the names of Pompeii's wealthiest citizens because they carved them into stone. We know almost nothing of the people who built that stone, mixed that mortar, and swept those floors, except that on the last day of this city's life, wealth would buy almost no advantage at all. The mountain did not check property deeds. Walk the space between those 2 extremes, and the true texture of Pompeii reveals itself. This is a city built almost entirely around the shopfront, the taberna, a single open room facing the street where a family lives, works, sells, and sleeps, often all within the same few hundred square feet. Nearly every street in the city's commercial quarters is lined with them. Bakeries with their stone mills still turning, worked by donkeys, walking endless circles. Wine bars with counters set into the walls, holding rows of large ceramic jars sunk into the stone, keeping wine and hot food at a steady temperature for workers who have no kitchen of their own to cook in. Laundries where enslaved workers tread cloth in tubs of stale urine collected from public jars on street corners because ammonia was the best cleaning agent the ancient world had. It was not a glamorous job, and everyone in Pompeii knew exactly whose job it was. Children thread through this world constantly underfoot in the Forum, playing games with knucklebones in alley shade, occasionally glimpsed in a doorway watching their mothers work a loom or grind grain. There is no formal system of public schooling. Education, where it exists at all for a Pompeian child, is purchased or passed down informally at home, or simply absent altogether. A wealthy boy might be tutored in Greek and rhetoric by a private teacher, likely enslaved himself, brought from somewhere else in the empire, specifically for his learning. A poor boy is far more likely already working, running errands, learning his family's trade with his hands. Neither of them has any reason to think of the mountain outside the city walls as anything other than scenery. By midday, the heat of a Campanian August has settled over the city, and Pompeii shifts into its second rhythm. The morning's business gives way to leisure, or at least to the version of leisure available to each class. At the Stabian Baths, one of the oldest and largest bathing complexes in the city, men and women in separate wings, as custom demands, move through a sequence that would be recognizable to any Roman citizen from Britain to Syria. The Frigidarium, cold and echoing, its domed ceiling ribbed like the inside of a shell. The Tepidarium, warm and softly lit through small glass windows, one of the earliest uses of glass for this purpose anywhere in the empire. And the Caldarium, hot enough to make skin flush red, heated by a hypercaust system, a raised floor with hot air circulating underneath from furnaces tended constantly by enslaved workers whose entire job is to keep the fires burning so the wealthy can sweat in comfort. Slaves scrape oil from the skin of bathers with curved bronze tools called stridules. Gossip moves through the steam faster than water, through the pipes who is in debt, who was seen where, whose husband was seen with whom. In a city this size, everyone's business is eventually everyone's business. Outside, in the amphitheatre on the city's southeastern edge, the oldest stone amphitheatre surviving anywhere from the Roman world posters have gone up announcing gladiatorial games. A famous riot broke out here 17 years earlier between Pompeian fans and visitors from a neighbouring town. A brawl so violent that the emperor himself banned games in the city for a decade. That ban has only recently been lifted. The people of Pompeii love their games with an intensity that would feel entirely familiar to anyone who has ever watched a modern stadium erupt over a disputed goal. None of them know that in less than 2 days, this amphitheatre, built to hold 20,000 roaring spectators, will instead become one giant grave marker, buried under volcanic material so completely that it will not be rediscovered for over 16 centuries. Pompeii is not an isolated town. It is a working port connected by the Sarno River to the sea and by the sea to the entire Mediterranean world. Down at the harbour district, the air smells different than in the Forum. Saltier, sharper, thick with the unmistakable reek of garum, the fermented fish sauce that is, quite literally, the ketchup of the Roman world. produced here in such volume that Pompeii's version is exported and prized as far away as Gaul and North Africa. Enormous ceramic amphorae, taller than a grown man, lined the dockside warehouses, stamped with the names of the merchants who owned them, ready to be loaded onto ships bound for Rome itself, less than a week's sail up the coast. Sailors from a dozen different ports mix here with local dock workers, speaking a patchwork of Latin, Greek, Oscan, the older local language still spoken by some of the region's oldest families, and fragments of languages from further still. A wealthy Pompeian's dinner table might include wine from Gaul, spices from beyond the eastern edge of the empire, glassware from Syria, all of it passing through this modest harbour on its way somewhere else, or staying here in a city that likes to think of itself as thoroughly Roman while remaining, in its bones, a Greek and Oscan settlement first. It is worth remembering this cosmopolitan, connected, endlessly ordinary bustle, because within 48 hours this harbour will become something else entirely. Not a place ships depart from, but one of the last places some residents will run toward, hoping against hope that the sea offers an escape the land no longer can. As the heat breaks and the light turns amber, the city's temples fill with a different kind of activity. This week is meant to be one of celebration. The festival of Vulcanalia, the feast day of Vulcan, god of fire and the forge, is only days away, and the city has been preparing offerings, garlands, small sacrifices meant to keep the fire god calm and generous for another year. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. The people of Pompeii do not worship Vesuvius as a god of destruction. If anything, they barely think of the mountain as dangerous at all. Their fears are aimed elsewhere, entirely at fire in their kitchens, fire in their forges, the ordinary hazard of a city built largely from wood and plaster. They have no concept, no vocabulary, no mythology for what their mountain actually is. The word volcano does not exist yet. It will be invented later from the name of the very god they are about to honor. In the house of the Vetti, two wealthy freedman brothers host what appears to be an ordinary evening meal, wine mixed with water in the Roman fashion, considered barbaric to drink undiluted, small dishes of olives and fish sauce and roasted dormouse, a delicacy specially raised in ceramic jars for exactly this purpose. Slaves move constantly between kitchen and dining couches. A lamp is lit as the light fades, its flame throwing shifting shadows against walls painted with scenes of cupids working as goldsmiths, playful and rich and utterly untroubled. Across the city, in smaller homes, the evening meal is simpler bread, cheese, whatever the day's work afforded, but the rhythm is the same. Families gathering as the light fails, voices rising and falling in the warm dark, the specific, unremarkable comfort of a summer evening that no one in this city will remember as the last one, because none of them yet know to. It is here, on the night of the 23rd into the 24th, that the first true warning arrives and passes almost entirely unnoticed. Small earth tremors ripple through the region. To us, with a century and a half of volcanology behind us, this is an unmistakable signal. Magma is on the move, forcing its way upward through cracked rock, building pressure toward a chamber that has been filling for perhaps as long as several centuries. But to the people of Campania, tremors are simply a fact of life, as familiar and forgettable as thunder. The earthquake of the year 62, powerful enough to crack the temple of Jupiter and topple statues across the region, is still within living memory, still visible in the half-repaired buildings scattered across the city. If anything, tonight's small shakes would have seemed almost reassuring by comparison. Minor, ordinary, the mountain grumbling the way it always has. A few miles down the coast, in the naval town of Misenum, a Roman fleet commander named Gaius Plinius, known to history as Pliny the Elder, is going about his evening. He is a scholar as much as an admiral, a man who has spent his life cataloguing the natural world in an enormous encyclopedia that still survives today. He has no idea that within roughly 18 hours, this mountain across the bay will make him famous for reasons that have nothing to do with his books, and will cost him his life for reasons rooted entirely in his curiosity and his sense of duty. Tonight, though, nothing yet demands his attention. The bay is calm, the sky is clear. Across Pompeii, oil lamps are extinguished one by one. The city sleeps, unaware that it has less than a single day of ordinary life left to it. Dawn breaks on the 24th of August exactly as it did the day before, which is precisely the point. There is no dramatic red sky, no ominous silence, no animals fleeing in panic that anyone bothers to record. The bakers light their ovens. The fishing boats go out. Farmers on the lower slopes of Vesuvius itself, tending vineyards planted in soil so rich with ancient volcanic minerals that the wine is famous across the empire, begin their morning work exactly as they always have, on ground that has fed their families for generations, entirely unaware that the fertility of that soil and the mountain's dormant violence are two expressions of the exact same geological process. In the harbour, ships continue loading and unloading cargo: wine, garum fish sauce famous throughout the empire, wool, pottery. Trade does not pause for anyone's premonition because no one has one. This is simply another ordinary Wednesday in a prosperous provincial city, and if you had walked its streets that morning, you would have found absolutely nothing to suggest that this city had less than 24 hours of existence remaining. That is, perhaps, the single most haunting fact in this entire story. There was no dramatic final morning. There was only an ordinary one, indistinguishable from 1,000 before it, right up until early afternoon. It is worth pausing here in these final ordinary hours on the strange and bitter irony sitting at the center of this entire story. The volcanic soil blanketing the slopes of Vesuvius, the very material that will soon bury this region beneath tens of feet of ash and stone, is also the reason the region is so extraordinarily fertile in the first place. Volcanic ash, broken down over centuries into rich, mineral-dense soil, produces wine grapes and olive trees of exceptional quality, which is precisely why the mountain's lower slopes are covered in cultivated vineyards rather than left wild. The farmers working those vineyards this morning are, in a very real sense, harvesting the products of the mountain's own ancient violence eruptions from centuries or millennia earlier, long since grown over, long since forgotten, their evidence visible only to the soil itself and to modern geologists who will eventually map layer upon layer of older eruptions stacked beneath the one about to happen. Nobody working these vineyards today has any way of reading that deep history in the ground beneath them. To them, that soil has only ever meant one thing: abundance. It has never once, in any memory passed down to them, meant danger. That single missing piece of knowledge, the fact that fertile volcanic soil and violent volcanic eruption are simply two chapters of the exact same story, is, in the end, the piece of information that would have saved the most lives, and it belonged entirely to a future none of them would live to see. It happens, by most modern reconstructions, sometime shortly after midday, likely around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Those in the streets, in the forum, in the baths, in the vineyards, on the mountain's own slopes, would have felt it before they saw it. A deep tremor, stronger than the ones the night before, rolling up through the ground and into their feet. And then, looking toward the mountain that had always simply sat there, green and familiar against the sky, they would have seen something no living person in that city had ever witnessed. The summit of Vesuvius tears open, and a column of pulverized rock, ash, and pumice begins rocketing skyward at speeds approaching several hundred miles an hour, driven by the release of pressurized gas that has been building beneath the mountain for who knows how long, decades, perhaps centuries. Within minutes, that column punches through the lower atmosphere entirely and begins spreading outward at altitude into the shape that will define this eruption in the memory of everyone who survives it. A vast, dark umbrella, mushrooming outward against the blue August sky, growing taller and wider with every passing minute. Across the bay in Misenum, Pliny the elder sister notices it first and calls her brother outside to see. He will later be the source, through the letters of his nephew, Pliny the Younger, the only eyewitness account of this eruption to survive from antiquity for the shape's most famous comparison. He says the cloud resembles nothing so much as an umbrella pine tree, its trunk shooting straight up before spreading into a broad flat canopy at the top. It is, unknowingly, one of the first scientifically precise volcanological observations in recorded history, made by a man watching in genuine wonder, with no idea yet that this cloud is a death sentence for tens of thousands of people directly beneath it. In Pompeii itself, 5 miles from the crater, the initial reaction is not the blind panic you might expect. It is confusion, awe. A crowd gathering to stare upward at something magnificent and utterly without precedent in their entire lives. Some flee immediately, instinct overriding curiosity. Many do not. Many stay to watch, to gather belongings, to decide what to do, spending precious minutes on a decision that, though none of them can know it, yet will determine who lives and who does not. Within the hour, the column of debris, blasted nearly 20 miles into the sky, begins to fall back to Earth, and the wind, blowing steadily from the northwest, carries almost the entire weight of it directly over Pompeii. It begins, witnesses would later describe, almost gently. Pale grey ash and small fragments of pumice-like, porous volcanic rock, cooled and full of trapped gas bubbles, so light it can genuinely be mistaken for hail, or for a strange, warm, gritty form of snow, start drifting down from the darkening sky. Within Pompeii's streets, people begin covering their heads with pillows, with cushions, with cloaks, as the fall thickens from a curiosity into a genuine hazard. By mid-afternoon, the sky over the city has gone the color of a deep bruise, then to something closer to true night despite the hour. The sun disappears entirely behind a curtain of ash, so dense it blots out daylight across the entire region. In the streets, pumice stones, some the size of a fist, rain down continuously, striking rooftops hard enough to be heard as a constant building roar, collapsing weaker roof structures under the accumulating weight. Every hour that passes adds several more inches of debris across the entire city. This is the point at which the true evacuation begins. Not a rush at the very beginning, but a slower, more desperate exodus as people realize this is not a passing storm, as the streets fill ankle-deep and then knee-deep with fallen pumice, making movement through the city increasingly difficult, increasingly exhausting, increasingly dangerous. Families gather what they can carry. Some clutch jewelry, coins, small valuables. We know this because their skeletal remains, found 19 centuries later, are still holding them. Others carry nothing but each other, moving as fast as ash-choked lungs and pumice-clogged streets will allow, toward the city gates and the roads leading away from the coast. Not everyone leaves. Some shelter in place, believing reasonably based on everything their lives had taught them about earthquakes and storms, that the worst would pass and the danger would lift by morning. It is one of history's most devastating misjudgments, made by ordinary, sensible people using every piece of experience available to them, none of which had prepared them for what a volcano could actually do. Inside the house of the Vetyi, the house of the Faun, and 100 houses just like them with no names history remembers at all, decisions are being made in real time, with no precedent to guide them, and no authority issuing instructions, because no authority in this city has ever needed to plan for anything like this. Some families load carts with whatever they can: silver, coin, small portable shrines to the household gods, the lares that every Roman family kept and prayed to daily, and push out through gates already choked with fleeing neighbors, animals, and debris. Others gather in interior rooms, away from windows and roof spans, most likely to collapse, reasoning that they had survived the earthquake of 17 years earlier this same way, sheltering rather than fleeing into chaos. Along the main roads leading away from the city, the exodus becomes its own kind of disaster. Carts overturn. Pumice, light as it is, accumulates fast enough underfoot that walking becomes exhausting within minutes, each step sinking into loose, shifting stone. Falling debris strikes the unprotected. Families are separated in the darkness and the crush of bodies, calling out names that the roar of falling stone swallows whole. And above it all, the sky continues to darken, hour by hour, toward a blackness that should not exist in the middle of an August afternoon. Across the bay, Pliny the Elder makes a decision that will define how we remember this entire catastrophe. Watching the eruption grow and receiving a desperate message from a friend trapped along the coast near the mountain's base, he orders the naval fleet under his command to set sail not away from the danger but directly toward it, intending both scientific observation and rescue. It is an extraordinary act, part scholarly curiosity and part simple human duty, and it will cost him his life. As his ships approach the shore near Stabiae, falling ash and pumice grow thick enough to threaten the vessels themselves, and the wind and rapidly retreating, disturbed sea make landing at some points impossible. He presses on, reaches shore, and spends the night with friends at Stabiae, reportedly remaining calm enough to eat, rest, and even sleep, while pumice and ash continue accumulating outside to a depth that will trap the household inside by morning, forcing them to tie pillows over their heads and walk out into the open through a rain of stone and darkness, searching for any way to escape toward the sea. Pliny the Elder will not survive the following morning. His death, likely from breathing in toxic fumes or suffering some sudden physical collapse amid the chaos and exertion, recorded by his nephew in a letter that remains, to this day, the closest thing history has to an eyewitness account of a Roman city's final hours. Back in Pompeii itself, as night falls on the 24th, the ashfall has not stopped. It has, if anything, worsened. Buildings across the city groan and, in places, collapse outright under literal tons of accumulated pumice pressing down on roofs never designed to bear such weight. The people still remaining inside the city walls by later estimates, perhaps as many as half the population, delayed by injury, by the elderly, and children who could not move quickly, by sheer disbelief, by simple bad luck in timing. Spend a night of continuous worsening horror, listening to the roar of falling stone and the groan of buildings failing around them in the dark. In the early hours before dawn on the 25th, the eruption enters its most violent and, for anyone still nearby, most lethal phase. The volcanic column, sustaining itself for nearly 12 hours, finally begins to collapse under its own weight. And when a column of that scale collapses, it does not simply fall. It generates what modern volcanologists call a pyroclastic density current, an avalanche of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments that races down the mountainside at speeds that can exceed 100 miles an hour at temperatures hot enough to instantly kill anyone in its path, long before it even has time to bury them. Herculaneum, a smaller and wealthier seaside town far closer to the mountain's base than Pompeii, is struck first and struck decisively. Unlike Pompeii, Herculaneum had already been largely evacuated by land or by sea during the earlier hours of falling ash. Its position closer to the volcano and away from the wind-driven ashfall giving residents a false sense that they had escaped the worst of it. Those who remained, several hundred people discovered centuries later, huddled together in boat chambers along what had once been the shoreline, believing the water offered their best hope of escape, were killed almost instantly by the first surge's extreme heat, a death so fast that some victims still show detailed impressions of clothing and even the shapes of their brains, superheated and preserved in a way found almost nowhere else in the ancient world. It is a horror precise enough that, even now, scientists debate the exact temperatures involved, because the evidence left behind is almost too well preserved to be believed. Pompeii, 5 miles further from the summit, is spared this very first surge. Its people have, without any way of knowing it, been granted several more hours of life, hours in which the choice to flee or shelter will become the single most consequential decision any of them will ever make. Through the deep hours of that terrible night, more pyroclastic surges roll down the mountain, each one traveling slightly further than the last, each one narrowing the margin of safety for anyone still within Pompeii's walls. Sometime in the hours just before or around dawn on the 25th, one of these surges finally reaches the city itself. For those who had already fled in the hours before walking south along the coastal road, away from the mountain, through ash that by now blanketed the entire region in a strange and terrible grey twilight, even at midday survival, though far from certain, at least remained possible. Many made it to safety in towns further down the coast, carrying nothing but what they had grabbed in the first panicked minutes and the simple, overwhelming fact of being alive. For those who remained inside Pompeii, sheltering in cellars, in strengthened rooms, in courtyards, believing shelter itself was protection, unaware that what was coming was not simply more falling stone, but a wall of scorching gas that no roof could stop. The end came with a speed that, in its own terrible way, offered something almost like mercy. Thermal analysis of remains discovered centuries later suggests many victims died from the surge's extreme heat within moments, their bodies frozen in postures of protection, of embrace, of simple final gestures, a mother curled around her child, a dog still chained in a doorway straining against a leash. It never had a chance to slip. A group of 18 people gathered together in a single room, perhaps believing that whatever was coming, they would rather face it together. In the Garden of the Fugitives, on the southern edge of the city, 13 people, men, women, children are found 19 centuries later, lying together where they fell, having made it almost to the edge of town before the surge overtook them. In a house nearby, a man is found with a small key still clutched in his hand, as though in his very last conscious moment he was thinking of a door he intended to lock behind him, or perhaps a door he still hoped to open somewhere safe. In the Villa of the Mysteries on the city's outskirts, the surge arrives with enough force to leave its mark on walls, painted with one of the most celebrated fresco cycles to survive from the entire ancient world. Scenes of ritual and initiation that have nothing at all to do with fire or death, and everything to do with a world that believed, right up until its final hour, that meaning and beauty were worth the trouble of creating, even in a city, by full daylight, on what should have been an entirely unremarkable Thursday. Pompeii no longer exists as a living city. It exists as a landscape, a grey, smoking, unrecognizable field of ash and volcanic debris, in places burying what had been three-story buildings almost entirely beneath the surface, erasing streets, forums, temples, and thousands of lives so completely that within a generation, most people living in the region could no longer say with certainty exactly where the city had stood. In the days after the eruption finally subsided, survivors and looters alike picked through the upper layers of ash wherever rooftops still poked above the surface, salvaging what valuables they could reach. But most of Pompeii, buried under nearly 20 feet of ash and pumice in places, was simply gone, sealed beneath the ground as thoroughly as if it had never existed at all. And in a strange, terrible way, that burial is the reason we know this city so intimately today. The very disaster that ended Pompeii's life also preserved it, sealing an entire Roman city in a single afternoon and evening, the way almost nothing else in the ancient world was ever preserved, its bread still in the ovens, its graffiti still readable on its walls, its dogs still chained, its wine jars still labeled, its wall paintings still holding their original color, protected for over 16 centuries from the wind, rain, looting, and slow decay that erased almost every other Roman city of its size. When Italian workers rediscovered the site in the 16th century and true excavation began in earnest in the 18th, archaeologists eventually developed a technique that remains one of the most quietly devastating discoveries in the history of the field: pouring plaster into the hollow voids left in the hardened ash by decomposed human bodies, recreating, in exact and haunting detail, the final postures of people who died in the year 79, arms raised, faces turned, hands clasped, positions of terror and tenderness alike, cast in plaster and displayed to this day, the closest thing that exists anywhere in the world to literally looking a victim of an ancient disaster in the face. And yet, for all of that horror, Pompeii did not disappear. It simply stopped mid-sentence and waited. Waited through the fall of the very empire that built it. Waited through centuries in which farmers plowed unknowing furrows across ground that concealed an entire buried civilization beneath their feet. Waited until curious hands finally broke through the hardened ash and found, astonishingly, a city still holding its breath, its arguments still scrawled on the walls, its ovens still holding the last loaf anyone there ever baked, its people still frozen in the last gesture of an ordinary life interrupted. There is something almost unbearably human in that. Every civilization believes, in its own quiet way, that it will simply continue, that today is not the last ordinary day, that the mountain that has always simply sat there will go on simply sitting there. Pompeii's people were not fools for believing that. They were exactly like us. And that, more than the ash, more than the plaster casts, more than the ruined columns still standing in the modern sun, is the real reason this city has never stopped holding our attention for nearly 2,000 years. It is not really a story about a volcano at all. It is a mirror. If this journey through Pompeii's last 2 days moved you, consider staying with us. There are more lost worlds waiting to be walked through, more cities frozen in their final hour, more civilizations that believed, right up until the very end, that they had all the time in it.